Deep in the rolling hills of Pennsylvania, swallowed by thick forests and winding dirt roads, lie the crumbling remains of Ravenwood Asylum. From a distance, the structure looks like nothing more than a ruin overtaken by nature. Its bricks fractured, windows shattered, and vines crawling up its skeletal walls. But locals claim that if you stand quietly at dusk, the wind carries more than just the rustle of leaves. It carries faint whispers, like the echoes of conversations long since ended. When Ravenwood was first constructed in the late 1800s, it was hailed as a modern institution designed to rehabilitate women deemed dangerous to society. On paper, it was a place of medicine and treatment. In reality, it became a prison for Pennsylvania's most notorious female criminals. Women whose crimes were so shocking that their very names were wiped from public record. Once admitted to Ravenwood, a woman's life was erased. Her past, her family, even her crimes were buried under the asylum's walls. The townsfolk who lived near Ravenwood avoided it at all costs. Even during its operation, strange phenomena surrounded the grounds. Farmers complained of their livestock refusing to graze near the asylum fence. Travelers claimed their carriages broke down whenever they passed its gates. Some swore that on foggy nights, they could see pale faces pressed against the barred windows, staring out with hollow eyes. For many, Ravenwood wasn't just a place of punishment. It was a place where something far more sinister dwelled. Inside, the conditions were nightmarish. The stone corridors were damp, echoing every footstep like a hollow warning. The air reeked of mildew and rot, and the sound of constant dripping water never ceased. Inmates were kept in dark, narrow cells, their screams bouncing endlessly down the halls. Nurses and guards reported sleepless nights, haunted by the cries of women who begged not for freedom, but for someone to stop the voices that plagued them in the dark. And yet, despite the terror it inspired, Ravenwood kept its doors open for decades. Behind its locked gates, stories of cruelty, madness, and unholy rituals brewed in secret. Families who sent their daughters there never spoke of them again. Over time, the asylum's reputation grew so grim that its very name was enough to silence a room. No one dared to ask what truly happened inside Ravenwood, because deep down, everyone already knew. Once you entered those walls, you never came out the same. Mary Whitlock was not the kind of woman anyone expected to become a killer. In the late 1800s, she was respected in her community, known as a trusted midwife who brought new life into the world. Families relied on her. Women praised her gentle touch, and her name was spoken with admiration. But behind the calm smile and soothing voice, Mary harbored a darkness that would only be revealed when it was too late. Over the years, an unsettling pattern began to emerge. Infants she helped deliver often did not survive more than a few days. Mothers grieved, but Mary was always there with comforting words, assuring them their child's death was God's will. She spoke with such conviction that few questioned her. Yet, whispers began to spread. Too many deaths surrounded Mary Whitlock, deaths that were quiet, sudden, and strangely similar. The truth surfaced when one grieving father, refusing to believe his newborn had died of natural causes, insisted on an examination. What the local doctor discovered horrified him: the infant had been smothered. When confronted, Mary did not weep, did not deny it, and did not beg for forgiveness. Instead, she calmly confessed, claiming she had been saving the children from the sins of this world. Her words were chilling, but her demeanor was worse. She seemed almost proud, as if she believed her crimes were an act of mercy. The courtroom was packed during Mary's trial. Mothers wept openly, fathers shouted curses, and the press labeled her the angel of death. Sketches of her face appeared in every newspaper, and readers could not look away from her unsettling expression. She did not cry. She did not show fear. In every drawing, Mary wore the same small, eerie smile, as if she knew something the rest of the world did not. That smile would become her signature, an image burned into Pennsylvania's history of horror. When the guilty verdict was read, the atmosphere turned suffocating. The community wanted closure, but Mary offered none. She spoke of heaven's gates and purity of souls, insisting that the children were better off in death than in life. Her words shook the courtroom, making even hardened men tremble. For the first time, people began to wonder if Ravenwood Asylum had been built not just to contain women like her, but to hide them away from the world entirely. Eleanor Price was the very picture of elegance. A wealthy widow in early 1900s Pennsylvania, she lived in a sprawling Victorian home, with velvet curtains, polished silverware, and halls that smelled of lavender and wine. She hosted dinner parties that became the talk of the town, where guests admired her sophistication and envied her fortune. But behind her gentle manners and aristocratic smile, Eleanor carried secrets that no guest at her table could have imagined. Her downfall began on a bitter winter night. Eleanor invited her extended family for a lavish dinner: roast duck, fresh bread, and her signature mulled wine. The house was alive with laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the warm glow of candles bouncing off the mahogany walls. But within an hour of the final toast, screams tore through the house. One by one, her relatives collapsed to the floor, writhing in agony as their veins seemed to burn from the inside. Eleanor, however, remained seated at the head of the table, watching in silence, her glass untouched. When investigators arrived, they discovered the wine had been laced with poison. Eleanor confessed immediately, but her confession was more disturbing than the crime itself. She spoke in a calm, almost soothing tone, claiming that her family had been infected by unseen demons, and that their souls needed cleansing. According to her, death was not punishment, it was deliverance. Witnesses described how her voice never trembled, how her eyes sparkled as she explained, as if she truly believed she had done something righteous. During her trial, the public's fascination grew into obsession. Newspapers printed her portrait daily, branding her the poisoner of Pennsylvania. Some painted her as a madwoman, others as a monster, but all agreed on one thing: there was something deeply unsettling about Eleanor Price. Courtroom witnesses recalled how she carried herself with grace, even while facing death. She often looked directly at the jury with a soft smile, as though she pitied them for not understanding the truth she claimed to see. On the day of her sentencing, Eleanor delivered her final words in a steady voice. She told the court that one day, those who judged her would come to realize she had been right, that the demons she fought were real, and that she had only been trying to save the world from their corruption. Her words lingered long after she was led away, haunting everyone who heard them. Some whispered that Eleanor's influence never truly ended, and that the seeds of her madness were planted in more minds than anyone dared to admit. Margaret and Lillian Crowe grew up in a small, desolate Pennsylvania mining town where whispers of curses and omens were as common as church bells. The sisters were inseparable, bound by a strange and almost unnerving connection. Even as children, they spoke in unison, finished each other's sentences, and seemed to share thoughts without uttering a word. Neighbors often said the Crowe girls had something unnatural about them, but no one could have foreseen the horrors that would follow them into adulthood. When they were in their late teens, A series of grotesque murders shocked the town. Victims were discovered in barns, alleys, and abandoned mines, each body marked with deep, deliberate carvings across the skin. The symbols were strange and unrecognizable, a language no one could decipher. Whispers spread that these weren't just killings but rituals. Fear gripped the community, and all eyes eventually turned to the Crowe sisters, who were often seen wandering the woods at night, chanting in voices that didn't sound like their own. Their arrest came suddenly. A farmer, hearing strange cries from his barn, stumbled upon Margaret and Lillian crouched over the body of his hired hand, their hands slick with blood. They did not flee, did not scream, and did not fight when police dragged them away. Instead, they stared blankly ahead, their lips moving in perfect harmony, repeating the same chilling phrase. "She told us to." No matter how many times investigators pressed them, they never explained who she was. The trial was one of the most disturbing in Pennsylvania's history. The sisters sat side by side, holding hands like frightened children, but their expressions betrayed no fear. They whispered to each other constantly, even as the gruesome evidence was displayed. At one point, a guard swore he saw both sisters smile at the exact same moment when the victims' photographs were shown. Witnesses in the courtroom described the experience of watching them as deeply unsettling, as if they weren't merely two women, but vessels for something else entirely. When they were finally sent to Ravenwood Asylum, rumors multiplied. Nurses reported waking at night to the sound of twin voices chanting from their cell, the words low and guttural, as though spoken in an ancient tongue. Other inmates claimed the sisters appeared in their dreams, whispering instructions or staring at them with cold, glassy eyes. Though heavily guarded, the Crowe sisters somehow maintained their aura of control. Two young women who seemed less like prisoners and more like conduits for something darker that no one could explain. As Ravenwood Asylum filled with some of the most dangerous female inmates Pennsylvania had ever seen, a strange pattern began to emerge. Guards, nurses, and even visiting physicians started to vanish without a trace. At first, their disappearances were explained away as runaways, men abandoning their posts and fleeing the grim, oppressive environment. But soon, the sheer number of missing staff grew impossible to ignore. Within a single year, nearly a dozen workers were gone, their absence marked only by hastily abandoned belongings left in their quarters. The first chilling discovery came from a night guard named Samuel Turner. His uniform was found neatly folded on his bunk, but his body was nowhere to be seen. The logbook showed that he had made his usual rounds until precisely 20:17 a.m., when the entry stopped mid-sentence. The ink on the page had trailed off, as though he had been yanked away mid-stroke. No signs of a struggle were found, no footprints in the dust, nothing, just silence where a man had once stood. As weeks passed, other staff began to whisper about strange occurrences at night. They spoke of cold drafts sweeping through locked hallways, of faint lullabies echoing through the asylum despite no inmate being awake. Some swore they saw pale figures moving in the dark, women in tattered gowns drifting soundlessly across the corridors. When these sightings were reported, the official records dismissed them as hallucinations due to stress. But privately, the staff knew something unnatural had taken root in Ravenwood. The inmates themselves began to feed the fear. Several women, usually silent and withdrawn, started speaking in cryptic phrases whenever a staff member disappeared. They would smile faintly and mutter things like, "She's taken another," or "He walks with us now." The Crowe sisters, in particular, seemed to know in advance when a disappearance was about to occur. Guards reported hearing them laughing in their cell, just moments before someone went missing, as though they were celebrating a secret only they understood. By the early 1930s, Ravenwood's reputation was no longer just that of a brutal asylum. It had become a place where people were swallowed whole by something unseen. Families of missing staff demanded answers, but none were ever given. Files grew thicker with unsolved cases. Yet every official report ended with the same cold phrase: no evidence of foul play. Behind the walls, however, those who still remained at Ravenwood felt the weight of dread pressing down on them, certain that whatever haunted the asylum was far from finished. By 1934, Ravenwood Asylum had become a shadow of itself. Its walls were cracked, the ceilings leaked, and the corridors reeked of damp rot. Yet what frightened the townspeople most were not its conditions, but the countless rumors of vanishing staff, unexplained screams, and the inmates' eerie behavior. Whispers circulated that the place was cursed, and many believed it was only a matter of time before Ravenwood turned on itself. That time came on a bitter November night, when flames erupted from the east wing, devouring the asylum from the inside out. Witnesses from the nearby village claimed the fire burned with an unnatural glow. Instead of the usual orange and red, the flames were described as deep violet, flickering with shadows that seemed to twist into human shapes. The smoke carried with it the sound of women singing, soft lullabies that drifted across the hills, so haunting that farmers stopped in their tracks just to listen. Some swore the voices were layered, dozens upon dozens of women chanting in perfect harmony, as if welcoming the fire rather than fearing it. As the inferno spread, chaos reigned inside. Guards rushed to unlock cells, but many inmates refused to leave. Reports later claimed that some women stood calmly as the flames surrounded them, their eyes glazed, their lips moving as though in silent prayer. Others walked barefoot into the blaze without screaming, their gowns catching fire as they disappeared into the smoke. One nurse, trembling as she fled, swore she saw Margaret and Lillian Crowe standing side by side, untouched by the flames, smiling faintly as the world around them burned. By dawn, Ravenwood was nothing more than a skeletal ruin. The structure had collapsed inward, leaving piles of smoldering rubble where the asylum once stood. Authorities began the grim task of sifting through the wreckage, expecting to find charred remains of inmates and staff alike. But to their horror, the ash revealed almost nothing: no skeletons, no bones, not even fragments of bodies. Official records listed everyone as presumed dead, yet privately, investigators admitted the fire had left them with an impossible question: where had everyone gone? Rumors spread quickly, feeding the terror. Locals claimed they saw women in white gowns, walking calmly into the surrounding woods that night, their faces pale but serene. Others swore they smelled burning flesh for weeks afterward, drifting on the wind like a warning. The ruins of Ravenwood were sealed off, the site left to rot, but the memory of that night remained etched in the minds of all who had witnessed it. To this day, many believe the fire was not an accident, nor even an escape attempt, but the fulfillment of something far more sinister that had been waiting to be unleashed. Today, the ruins of Ravenwood Asylum sit in silence, swallowed by thick forest and creeping vines. Its skeletal remains jut out from the earth like broken teeth, a monument to a past too dark to fully erase. Locals warn outsiders to stay away, claiming the land itself carries a curse. Yet thrill seekers, ghost hunters, and curious hikers continue to sneak onto the grounds, drawn by the legend of the asylum, where Pennsylvania's most dangerous women vanished into fire and shadow. Few who venture there after dark return unchanged. Those who step inside describe an immediate heaviness in the air, as though the very walls are still alive. The silence is broken only by the faint sound of dripping water or the rustle of unseen footsteps in the debris. Some visitors claim to hear muffled crying from deep within the ruins, while others report soft whispers brushing against their ears, though no one is standing near them. The most unnerving accounts come from those who swear they've heard lullabies drifting through the air. The same chilling songs that were said to echo during the fire nearly a century ago. Stranger still are the sightings. Witnesses describe seeing women in tattered hospital gowns, standing among the trees. Their faces pale and indistinct, their movements unnaturally slow. Sometimes they appear only as fleeting shadows in the corner of the eye. Other times, they are clear as day, figures frozen in silence, watching with unblinking eyes. Some hikers say the apparitions vanish when approached, while others insist the women follow them, drifting silently until the visitor flees in terror. Paranormal investigators, who have dared to spend the night, report violent disturbances. Cameras shut off without warning, batteries drain instantly, and recordings capture voices that were never spoken aloud. On several occasions, symbols, eerily similar to the carvings once linked to the Crowe sisters, have been found scratched into the stone walls, though no one can explain how they appeared. One investigator even claimed to wake in the middle of the night to find a woman's face hovering inches above his own, whispering the words, "She told us to." To this day, Ravenwood is avoided by the townsfolk. Children are warned not to wander near the forest, and hunters refuse to set traps in the area. The land feels wrong, they say. Too quiet, too watchful. Those who return from the ruins often carry a lingering dread, as if something from the asylum has followed them home. And though the fire reduced Ravenwood to ashes long ago, its shadows have not faded. If anything, they seem to have grown stronger, waiting patiently for the next soul brave, or foolish, enough to cross the threshold. And so, the story of Pennsylvania's most dangerous women, the midwife who smiled as she sent infants to their graves, the widow who poisoned her family in the name of purity, the Crowe sisters who whispered of an unseen master, and all the others swallowed by the walls of Ravenwood, has never truly ended. The asylum may be gone, reduced to ash and ruin, but its shadows live on. Every disappearance, every scream, every whispered chant still lingers in the dark corridors of memory. Some believe Ravenwood was merely a place of human madness, but others are convinced it was something far worse. A gateway, a vessel for forces beyond comprehension. And when you hear of hikers vanishing in those woods, or families speaking of lullabies in the dead of night, remember this: the women of Ravenwood were never laid to rest. Their stories are not finished, because evil doesn't burn. It waits. And sometimes, it calls.
If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so the next secret finds you first.